The day my mother-in-law Martha showed up at our doorstep waving property papers was the day I finally decided enough was enough. For 3 years, I kept my position as the youngest CEO of Regional Trust Bank hidden from my husband's family, not out of shame, but at my husband's request. "They'll treat you differently," he'd said. "Let's just keep things simple." Simple. I almost laughed at the memory as I watched Martha's triumphant smirk. "Get out. This is my house now." She thrust the papers in our faces. "I bought it from the bank. They're foreclosing, and I got first rights to purchase." My husband James looked devastated. "Mom, how could you? You knew we were struggling with the payments after my accident." "Exactly." She cut him off. "This is what happens when you marry beneath you. I told you Rachel was no good. Look at her, working at that bank, probably just a teller, can't even help with the mortgage." I stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold. 3 years of subtle digs, of Martha's constant reminders that her family came from old money while I was working class. 3 years of her undermining every decision we made, of trying to convince James that he'd married down. "You have 1 week to get out," Martha declared, settling onto our couch like she already owned it. In her designer suit and pearls, she was the picture of smug satisfaction. "I'm doing this for your own good, James. Once you're free of her, you can move back home. Margaret's daughter is divorced now, and she's always had her eye on you." That's when I noticed something odd about the papers she was holding. The bank's letterhead looked off. "May I see those documents?" I asked quietly. Martha laughed. "Why? Want to check if they're real?" "I assure you, I pay quite a premium to get this done quickly and quietly." Called in some favors with the bank's board members. They were very accommodating once they knew who I was. I bet they were. Especially since I'd been out of the office all week at a banking conference in New York. Someone had obviously taken advantage of my absence to push through what appeared to be fraudulent paperwork. "The documents, please," I repeated, holding out my hand. "Oh, let her look," Martha told James with a patronizing smile. "Let her see how real money handles things." I took the papers and began reading, my suspicions growing with each line. The signatures were all wrong. The authorization codes didn't match our system's format. Someone at the bank had helped Martha create completely fraudulent foreclosure documents. "Interesting," I murmured, pulling out my phone. "Just need to make a quick call." "To who?" Martha scoffed. "Your little bank manager. Don't bother. This came from much higher up." I put the phone on speaker as it rang. Mrs. Harrison's office, my executive assistant answered. "Sarah, it's Rachel. I need you to pull everything we have on the Anderson property foreclosure." Apparently, it was processed while I was at the conference. "Anderson property?" Sarah sounded confused. "I don't have any foreclosure documents for." "Oh." Her voice changed. "Mrs. Harrison, there's an internal memo here. Someone tried to push through paperwork, but it was flagged for fraud. Should I call security?" Martha's face went from smug to confused. "Mrs. Harrison. But that's me." I finished, ending the call. "Rachel Harrison, CEO of Regional Trust Bank. The one whose board members you claim helped you commit mortgage fraud." The color drained from Martha's face. "That's impossible. You're just a what?" I asked softly. "A teller? Working class? Beneath your son?" James was staring at me, his mouth open. "Rachel? You're the CEO? But you said you worked at the bank." "I do," I nodded. "You're right," I agreed, standing up. "I'm not one of you. I'm the CEO of the bank you just tried to defraud, and you're about to learn exactly what that means." The next few hours were a blur of activity. FBI agents arrived to take Martha's statement, while my bank's internal security team tracked down the employees who had helped create the fraudulent documents. 2 junior executives were escorted from the building, their careers in banking effectively over. Martha sat in our living room, her designer suit wrinkled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. "I was only trying to protect my son," she kept repeating. "By making us homeless?" James asked quietly. He hadn't moved from his spot on the couch, still processing the day's revelations. "By trying to orchestrate my divorce and remarriage like some medieval noble." "You don't understand," Martha pleaded. "Our family has a position to maintain. When you married, when you chose. When I chose a woman who turned out to be more successful than your entire family combined." James finished. "Is that what you can't accept, Mother? Not that Rachel is working class, but that she's actually far more accomplished than we are?" I watched my husband sign up for us with a mixture of pride and sadness. 3 years of hiding my success, all because we'd wanted to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. Mrs. Anderson, one of the FBI agents interrupted. We'll need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. Attempted mortgage fraud is a serious federal offense. Martha's face crumpled. But I'm a Anderson. We've been on the bank's board for generations. Not anymore, I said quietly, checking my phone. I just received confirmation from the board. Your family's minor shares have been bought out. Your position as an honorary board member has been terminated. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is our bank. Our legacy. No, I corrected her. This is my bank. I built it from a struggling regional institution into one of the fastest growing financial institutions in the country. Your family's name might be on some old documents, but that's all it is now, history. As the agents led Martha out, she turned to James one last time. Son, please. But James wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. 3 years, he said softly. All those nights you worked late, all those meetings with the board. I thought you were just a dedicated employee. I wanted to tell you, I admitted, but you seemed so adamant about keeping things simple with your family, and then it just got harder to find the right moment. He shook his head, laughing quietly. My wife, the secret banking CEO. No wonder you never worried about the mortgage payments. About that, I pulled out my tablet, bringing up our account details. We were never actually struggling with payments. After your accident, I created a special payment plan under a different department so it wouldn't be obvious I was involved. Every payment has been made on time. So Mother tried to foreclose on a house that wasn't even in foreclosure. Using fraudulent documents from a bank run by her daughter-in-law, I nodded. Not her best plan. The next few weeks were chaotic. Martha's arrest made headlines. Banking dynasty matriarch arrested for fraud. She ended up pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for naming everyone involved in the scheme. The true fallout, though, was personal. James's family imploded as decades of Martha's manipulations came to light. His sister Caroline called, crying, to confess that Martha had sabotaged her art career by convincing potential galleries that Caroline was unstable. His brother Michael admitted that his divorce had been partly due to Martha's constant interference. She always said she was protecting us, Caroline said during a family dinner, the first one in years without Martha presiding over it. But really, she was just controlling us. 6 months later, Martha was sentenced to probation and community service. The judge took her age and clean prior record into account, but she was barred from any involvement in financial institutions. The scandal destroyed her social standing, the very thing she'd been so desperate to protect. I found her waiting in my office one morning, looking older and smaller without her designer armor. I sold my house, she said without preamble. The big one, where James grew up. I'm moving into a condo. I waited, saying nothing. You could have had me arrested immediately, she continued. Could have pressed for harder charges, made sure I served time. Yes, I agreed. I could have. Why didn't you? I looked at my mother-in-law, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. Because destroying you wouldn't have fixed anything. You did that yourself, with your own choices. She nodded slowly. James is lucky, to have you. I was wrong. About everything. Yes, I said again, you were. After she left, I found a small package on my desk. Inside was a set of pearls, the ones she always worn to show her family's status. With them was a note. For my daughter-in-law, the real banking dynasty. I never wore the pearls. Instead, I had them valued and donated the money to a scholarship fund for working-class women pursuing careers in finance. The Rachel Harrison Scholarship has helped dozens of women climb the corporate ladder, each one defying someone's expectations of where they belong. James and I moved out of the house that had caused so much drama. Not because we had to, but because it felt right to make a fresh start. We bought a penthouse downtown, closer to the bank. This time, when we hosted our first housewarming party, everyone knew exactly who I was. Martha lives quietly now, volunteering at a women's shelter as part of her community service. Last month, she asked if she could mentor some of the shelter's residents on financial literacy. I'm told she's surprisingly good at it. Sometimes, when I'm reviewing loan applications, I think about how different things might have been if Martha had simply accepted me. if we hadn't felt the need to hide my success to keep the peace. But then I remember the scholarship recipients, the women who've been inspired by this story to push back against their own Marthas, and I think maybe it all happened exactly as it needed to. Last week we had a family dinner. James, his siblings, their families, and yes, Martha. As we sat around the table, Martha raised her glass. "To Rachel," she said quietly, "who taught me that true class has nothing to do with where you come from, and everything to do with how you treat others." I raised my glass in return, remembering that triumphant woman who'd waved fraudulent papers in my face a year ago. The woman who thought she could use money and status to control her children's lives. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone who had learned the hard way that real power isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you can build together. "To family," I replied. "All kinds." Later that night, as James and I walked home, he squeezed my hand. "You know, I think this is what they mean by living well being the best revenge." I thought about Martha's journey from arrogant matriarch to humbled mentor, about my own path from secret CEO to public role model. "No," I said softly. "The best revenge is helping others live well too." And in my office at the bank, in a frame on the wall, hangs a copy of those fraudulent foreclosure documents, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from giving them the chance to become better people, even if that lesson comes with an FBI investigation and a very public fall from grace.